have a half hour ahead of us, another 30-minute period for this program series, where we discuss a wide range of subjects and issues, concerns. And with us for this program is a man with a variety of concerns. He's had a variety of activities as a former professor of political science, a mental health counselor, Alan Zundel. Alan, nice to have you with us for this program.
Thank you, George. It's good to be here.
I know we could have taken any number of directions as I've talked with you and tried to set a direction for us to take, but I think it turns out we're going to be concerned with the fact that you are the Green Party candidate for Secretary of State.
Pacific Green Party.
Pacific Green Party. And I guess we may as well start off at the very beginning for the benefit of those viewers who are not familiar, other than by the name Green Party. What is it? What does it mean? What are the goals of the Green Party? And where would your goals fit in?
Okay. Well, the Green Party, as the name implies, is a political party. We run candidates for office, and members of the party also take part in other types of political activities, like trying to pass initiatives and protests and things like that.
But the color green
implies it's an environmental. Environmentalism is high on our list of concerns, and in particular these days, climate change, which in my opinion is not something that's going to happen, but it's something that's already happening, and we should be extremely worried about it. But the political system does not seem to be responding to it very well. So environmental concerns are one part of it. We often refer to 4 pillars, which originally were identified by the German Green Party, which formed before the American Green Party, and that is ecological wisdom, how we live with our environment in a way that's sustainable, social justice, which involves both human rights and an economy that works for people, grassroots democracy, which means bringing power back to the ordinary people, making sure your votes count, and that money isn't the only thing ruling our putative democracy. And I'm blanking on the fourth one.
But the important thing here, as I hear you mentioning them, is to give more effective opportunities for the general public to have an influence on the governmental policies and on politics. And in my view, and we've discussed this with various people from different approaches in the past, money, private money, is the big problem, in my view, the big problem of trying to get an effective public control of what is going on in our country. Private money suggests big money coming in and taking charge.
Yeah, big campaign donors, big corporations being able to influence elections through the use of money, billionaires, all those types of things. Of course, underlying that is that in our country, economic inequality has been growing for decades and is very at an extreme level now, which means that those who have money have the resources to influence elections to a degree greater than in the past.
How do we go about correcting this problem? And I think being more specific, how do we go about removing the use of private money in dominating our election system? As things currently stand, those with the biggest amount of money give it to candidates, maybe to candidates for both of the 2 major parties. I don't mean to ignore the Greens, but we'll talk about Republican and Democrats for obvious reasons. Those with big money would give significant monies to a candidate for the Senate, let us say, from both parties. And then when either candidate makes it, then the money they've given suggests that they will have the influence in dominating that candidate's policies.
Yes, of course.
And that's the way you think it does work?
Oh yeah, sure.
How are we going to change that?
It's not going to be easy. There's a variety of ways to go about it, and I put them into 2 broad categories. One is trying to mitigate the role of money, because you're never going to eliminate it unless you build an economy in which people are more equal and have more access to resources on an equal level, which would be some distant goal maybe.
Resources on an equal level would be one thing, but the opportunity to use those resources to dominate the political operation is what I think is really at the heart of it. We may still have the very rich and those in poverty,
Yeah.
but if the very rich or those with money cannot use that money to influence the candidates for election, that should change things.
Well, that runs into problems of free speech. At the national level, when they've tried to, a number of times they've tried to restrict the influence of money in elections, and a number of times they failed. The most recent failure is when the Supreme Court in the Citizens United decision decided that corporations have the same rights as natural persons, and so you couldn't restrict their freedom to free speech in a political context, meaning they could spend as much money as they want to try to influence the outcomes of elections. And it's the same problem at the Oregon level, too. Our Constitution has a right to free speech, and we passed about 10 years ago an initiative, Measure 47, that tried to limit campaign expenses, campaign spending and contributions, and put in place more revealing of where the source of the money was coming from in political campaigns, but it hasn't been implemented because of constitutional concerns. So there's been periodic attempts. Most recently, somebody tried to pass, get on the ballot a measure saying that the Constitution would allow this, permit the restriction of campaign financing in various ways, but it was tossed out by the Secretary of State on the advice of attorneys, because they claimed that the measure tried to address two questions at once, which was the campaign financing and the disclosures of where money come from. So they blocked it from being on the ballot. But in both cases, you're going to have to either amend the Constitution at the national level or at the state level, or else you're going to have a court that decides that that's permissible, that corporations are not really entitled to all the rights of natural persons, and that you can restrict it in some ways.
Well, being a realist, at least trying to be one, I have to say that your chances of being elected as Secretary of State in Oregon are fairly minimal. But you're approaching it very seriously and with great hopes, but the reality that the big money is not going to make that very possible. If you were elected, what could you do as the new Secretary of State to initiate or to push along the idea of controlling the role of money in elections?
Okay. I'll talk about that for a bit, but I also like to get back to the question of what the chances of being elected are, because I think that's important to address too. Supporting things like campaign financing reform through amending the Constitution, or what's become more popular now is the idea of public funding for political campaigns, and if a candidate accepts that funding, they would restrict how much they can spend. So it'd be, if you take one, you got to do the other. That would allow a lot of candidates who otherwise wouldn't have the resources to run a very significant campaign to do that a little better.
I mean, once they get the money, it restricts how they can spend money. What it means is that is the money they could spend, and presumably it would be equally divided among candidates for the same office.
Not exactly.
But that's the money they could use. They could not use money out of their own pockets or out of a big donor's.
No, it depends on how it's set up. Depends on how
realistically, to make it work
Yeah.
and to correct the ills of our system, it would have to be set up in a way that prevents private money coming in to influence it. Is that right?
Not prevents, because you would it depends on how it's written up, how the law would be written. But one way to do it is that you get a certain amount of public funding, and then for each small donation you get, the government in some form matches that, so you can continue to raise money, and it can show a level of support from people other than the big donors.
The government matches it, meaning as you get money from a private donor, the government then winds up giving you an equivalent amount more, or does it give your opponent an equivalent amount so the balance is there?
For you to be able to get any of this public funding for your campaign, you have to agree to limits on how much you're going to spend and how much you're going to raise. And for the government matching of what you raise, they're only going to match things that you raise in small amounts from a lot of people. In other words, small donations as opposed to large ones. But all those things are trying to work around the edges of the system we have now to limit the influence of money. And the problem with money, of course, is it's just like water. It finds ways to flow around restrictions. I think what you really need is to move towards fundamental reform of the electoral system, which brings me back to the point of why we don't have a good chance of winning. I don't think it's because, as people sometimes assume, that all the third parties have flaky ideas and they're so off the political map that nobody would find them appealing other than a few malcontents. I think there's a lot of resonance with the public, especially today, with third-party agendas. The reason we have trouble getting traction and the reason we only have two parties and so it's easier for donors to influence those two parties is because we have an election system that undergirds a two-party system with this spoiler problem. It's called the first-past-the-post system. Whoever gets the most votes wins. I would prefer to see a system like ranked choice voting, that's also called instant runoff voting. And in this, a voter gets to rank candidates for an office in the order they prefer them. Like, say you like the Green Party candidate best, you could say this is my first choice, but if they don't win, my second choice would be the Democrat. Candidate has to get more than half the first choice votes to win, which isn't true now. Right now, someone can win with less than half the votes as long as they get more than anybody else. This kind of system eliminates the spoiler problem because if nobody gets a majority of the first place votes, the one who came in last, those votes are transferred to those voters' second choice. So if nobody gets a majority and your candidate was the Green Party candidate, if they got the fewest votes, your vote would be transferred to your second choice. It allows people more choices, it would reduce the influence of money, and it would also make it possible for more candidates to get a fair hearing from the public.
Let us assume what I had suggested earlier is not very likely. And that is that the Green Party has great success. Let's talk about the state of Oregon in the coming election. That you become elected Secretary of State. Will most of those votes electing you come from people who have been Democrats and as a result run the risk of fewer votes cast for Democrats, meaning the impact of the Republican Party would be all the greater, and that we might wind up having this character who's running for president now becoming elected.
Right. Yeah, that's the problem with the first-past-the-post system is that it creates spoilers and people can win if you split your votes among similar candidates. Like if you feel like Green Party and Democrats are in some ways more alike than they would be with a candidate like Donald Trump. You know, you'd have trouble deciding, am I going to vote Green or am I going to vote for the Democrat because I don't want the Republican to win, which is why I say we need fundamental reform of the way we elect people. But even if that were to happen, in the presidential race in particular, it depends on which state you live in and how much support the Democrat has. If it's a close race, there's more of a chance that the Green Party could throw the race to the Republican. If it's not a close race, a lot of people could vote for the Green Party and the Democrat could still come in ahead. You got to remember that over the last several decades, fewer and fewer people have been affiliated with the major parties and more have becoming independents or unaffiliated or affiliating with a third party. So a lot of our votes are going to come not necessarily at the expense of the Democrats. Some will be hardcore Greens who would only vote Green anyway. Some will be independents. Some will be people who are only loosely affiliated with the Democrats because they think there's nowhere else to go. So our votes could come from a lot of different places.
How does a third party achieve a place on the ballot? The Greens are on the ballot now, but what about a fourth or fifth party? What are the requirements that would enable a fourth party to get on the ballot and draw votes?
Well, there are fourth and fifth parties in our state. We have the Independent Party, the Progressive Party, the Constitutional Party, the Libertarian Party. How they get on the ballot is they either have to get a certain percentage of the vote in a statewide election.
That means a previous election, so they're not on the ballot
Yeah,
for the
well,
present
initially,
time.
to get on the ballot, you have to get a certain number of registered voters to affiliate with you and kind of sign an initiative petition to get on the ballot. So you've got to go around gathering signatures and getting enough registered voters to do that.
You know, something would have to make the public very mad, and there's good reason to be mad right now about the way
they have a lot of reasons right now.
big money controls things. But if something were to happen that make them very mad, that then suggests to me that there's a way of them marshaling their forces together and becoming the dominant factor in a presidential election. What kind of thing would have to happen? Is someone going to have to get killed along the way and make
I hope
people
not.
wake up?
God forbid, but you never. I remember 1968 when we had an assassination of a presidential candidate.
And Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah, and as well as Martin Luther King the same year. This is an interesting year. And as a political scientist, there's a theory of political realignments. That means every so many decades, there's a tendency for what seems to be a fairly stable party system to break up and reconfigure. Okay? And we're about overdue for that. You can see this in both parties right now, both the Democrats and Republicans, how they're splitting apart. You have Bernie Sanders' campaign splitting apart Democrats. Some for him, some against him, some for Hillary, some, against Sanders. He wasn't even a Democrat to begin with, but he ran as a Democrat because we have this first past the post system that creates spoilers. He didn't want to be a spoiler, so he ran as a Democrat. But it's splitting apart the party. On the other side, you got Donald Trump winning, who a lot of the mainstream Republicans don't like at all, and some of them are actually now giving money to Hillary because they don't like Donald Trump. So you see the parties beginning to break up like that. What is going to end up looking like after this election? I mean, it's a fool's errand to try to guess that because so many unexpected things have happened already.
How do you feel about Hillary Clinton's candidacy, what she represents, and although you, being with the Greens, would go for Joe Stein as president, but what do you feel are the possible dangers and the potential of Hillary becoming president, as right now it appears she will?
Right. I think she has the best chance of winning unless she hangs herself, which she seems to have given herself a lot of rope to do. Personally, I think Hillary is marginally better than Donald Trump, and that's not to say that Donald Trump is better than people think he is. It's to say Hillary may be a lot worse than people think she is. She's dependent on large campaign financing, just like most of the other people at a national level are. She's taken money from fossil fuel industries, which means there's not going to be significant movement on climate change. She's taken significant money from Wall Street, which means there's not going to be significant reform of Wall Street in our financial system. So it's the same problem that you always see. She's also compared to the Greens, she's much more prone to use military force as a way of settling international problems, which hasn't worked. I mean, we've been in Afghanistan for what, I don't know, 12 years, 14 years? And the whole region seems to be breaking apart more and more the more we intervene. So those kind of solutions to us don't seem to be working. And candidates like that do not seem to be addressing our concerns. So Hillary Clinton is certainly not going to solve any of the problems that we think are important.
You mentioned some of the major ones. Militarism is a key one. Do you want to spend a moment or two further evaluating Hillary Clinton in terms of the dangers of having her become our president?
Not necessarily, because talking a lot about Hillary gives a lot of attention to her as opposed to our party and what we stand for. And as Secretary of State, obviously, I'm not going to have a lot to do with reforming Wall Street or changing our military policy or anything like that. So that's why my focus is on electoral reform, because once we've changed the election system, and we've got to start at doing that. We actually have a measure on the ballot in Benton County to institute ranked choice voting, which I was describing earlier. It's also called instant run-up voting. And I think if this passes and we can show it works well, we've got a good chance to bring it into other races in the state as well, including the presidential race in Oregon. So my focus really is on changing the election system as a way to reduce the influence of money and make sure other candidates who voters might support if there wasn't this spoiler problem will have the opportunity to do that in future elections.
Isn't changing the electoral system a slow and long process?
Everything's a slow and long process in this political system.
And so it will take time. We have to be patient. Have to educate, I guess, the youth. Let's say in high school at least, at that point and beyond. But in high school, educate them about the importance of this happening. Is it likely that our educational systems can do this? Or is there a problem preventing them from getting into the political arena as such?
Oh no, I mean, they could talk about different electoral systems, and I used to do that regularly as a political scientist. You would compare our country's electoral system with those of democracies in other parts of the world and say, this is why we have a two-party system and why they have other parties who actually get involved in their parliaments. So that can be done in a very neutral, nonpartisan way.
Well, the Citizens United development, creation, was through the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Now, the Supreme Court also has the ability, it's my understanding, and maybe you could explain how this works, the Supreme Court could change it, could say, this is not consistent with our constitutional system, and we need to no longer have the Citizens United approach. Is that something that can happen? What gets in the way of it happening?
Well, what gets in the way is that, I mean, who's going to appoint a Supreme Court justice that would take that position? I don't see the Democrats as being out front in that issue as well. There's a lot of talk about Citizens United, but when you get down to it, it's not one of their highest priorities. Our experience as a minor party has been that the Democrats do not really believe in democracy because they've tried to keep us in a marginalized position in a number of ways, both fair and unfair, including keeping our candidates from even attending the political debates that aren't run by a nonpartisan organization. They're run by the two major parties. So I don't see them as being ahead in this issue. I think they're quite comfortable with money, not speaking for all Democrats, obviously, or even all office holders, but I think the people that are really at the top level in the party are quite comfortable with the system that we have now. That's how they won, that's how they got where they are, and they're not looking to see radical change in that.
Well, that problem, as you describe it in the Democratic Party, is even greater in the Republican Party. We've had that long-standing recognition of, in my view, of how money, big money, dominates the policies and the approaches of the Republican Party. So we're facing, first of all, you say to us, the Democratic Party doesn't seem ready or willing to do this. And if they will not, clearly you're not going to have the answer coming from the Republican Party. And we're going to have the Greens suddenly become dominant in order to have this happen.
Yeah, well, I'd like to see that happen. But this gets back to your point of how are we going to get anywhere. For one thing, I'm an educator, not a politician, right? My background is in education, and I'm using this campaign as an educational tool to explain to people the importance of fundamental election reform and how it can be done. That's educating citizenry to prepare them to support these kind of measures and see the importance of it. Once we can do that, then a lot of things change out of that. And you have an awful lot of citizens ready to hear a message like this who are obviously unhappy with the way things are going. And we also have an opportunity in social media through the internet to reach people in less expensive ways that we haven't had in the past. We can't just be blocked off by not getting on national media or in the national newspapers. We can actually do an end run to the public through social media.
That has had a very great influence in terms of a change in our society in recent years. However, let me ask you about the mass media, whose influence clearly is still significant, most significant. And why, this is probably answers itself, but why do the mass media themselves reflect the interests of big money?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but I'd say a simplified version of it would be that the people at the national level, both in the media and in the corporations and in the political world, they associate with each other all the time. And the people you associate with, you tend to start to think the same way, right? You find yourself in a group of people who think one way, there's a subtle social pressure to think the same way. And I think just from talking to each other all the time, they start to see the world in the same way, which is that this system is normal. There's no other possibility. Money rules, and the two parties is the normal way to run things, and anything else just seems outside the norm to them, and they can't imagine possibilities beyond that.
How do the Greens, how would you at this point be able to change that attitude? I mean, that's something that seems overwhelming. They have this attitude, they're not going to fool with changing it. It has placed them where they are. They're not going to risk the possibility of losing that status. How is it that we can go about changing it?
Well, if you're talking about the media, that's already changing, because newspapers are dying all over the country because of the internet. People are going to other sources for information, and we can exploit those other sources to get different messages out.
Well, that's the newspapers, the radio and TV, I assume, would be the other aspect of the mass media as such.
And so we have cable shows like this, and they can be put on the internet, and more people can hear the message. So there's ways to get the message out there. The media, though, at the national level, people don't trust them the way they used to in the past. You and I remember the days of Walter Cronkite and how everybody thought, well, if he said it, it must be true.
Which was dangerous in
It was
itself.
dangerous, but he was a lot more trustworthy than some people are now. So there's greater skepticism on the part of people, which has its good side and bad side. The good side is they're willing to look for other sources of information and challenge what they're being given. And the downside is that they start to believe anything without good cause.
Well, as a Green, I don't know if you have a platform as such, but would there be something in such a platform that would say directly to the voters out there, whom you're hoping will vote for you, that this is what you intend to do if given the opportunity in terms of cleansing the financing of our election system?
Well, my slogan is, I'm your best choice for better elections. What I want to do is reform the election system as a first step to opening up the political process to other voices and reducing the influence of money. Once you can take that step, other steps follow. We can actually do this if we start there.
You open the system to other voices. We're going to say, we're forgetting about the money now, we're going to get rid of it if we can. But what other voices are there, would you say? The Green Party?
The Green Party. There's plenty of voices. There's people who haven't been heard in the Libertarian Party and Progressive Party. All those voices are people that feel strongly enough what's going on in the country that they want to propose other solutions and other ideas and other ways of thinking, but they're not getting a fair hearing because they're marginalized by the kind of election system we have, not due to the nature of their ideas so much as due to the nature of the election system, which was, in a lot of respects, deliberately created just to maintain the power of the two-party system.
Well, that's the great advantage of a program such as ours, and having guests such as you, for those who hear it and want to act on the measures you're talking about. Maybe we've got a chance. Maybe if we had a few dozen other programs like this, and there aren't many. But again, my thanks to Alan Zundel for being our guest on the program today, and we look forward to seeing some of what you suggest becoming a reality in our society.
Thank you.